I have two announcements, or three. Someone bought a book in the bookstore and left it there. So if you, this is the book. Can you see it over there? So be sure and pick it up tomorrow. The breakfast will be in a different room. It'll be on the first floor in room 167 and 171. They are next to each other in spite of the way the numbers go. We've been asked to announce that for those who are interested, there is I think it's a petition addressing the annual meeting of the Iowa Conference of the United Church with regard to the ERA, and if anyone is interested in reading that and signing it, it's in the box at the registration desk where you're to put your evaluation sheets, or right next to it. So much for the housekeeping. Can you hear me all right? In the back, put your hand up if you can hear. Okay. We are fortunate tonight to have with us Maggie Kuhn to talk to us about change that she sees in our world. Maggie Kuhn is the founder and leader of the Gray Panthers, a group of old and young who strive to eradicate ageism. She says they're concerned about war, concerned about nuclear power, about growing unemployment, about the way society has grouped people according to ages and kind of separated them from each other. She says the Gray Panthers group works for social change. She is an energetic organizer, speaker, an author, a lifelong worker in the United Presbyterian Church, and also in the YWCA. Now, I have to consult her as to whether she wants to stand on our soapbox when she talks or not. And if so, I will have to place the box for her. All right. Not the biggest soapbox you ever saw.
That's how was that?
Is that all right?
That's a little better, isn't it?
Oh. See if the microphone is all right, and we'll tell us if we're doing it wrong.
I'm delighted to be here tonight and very pleased that you invited me. It's a privilege. It's a historical event for you, I understand. This is the first time Iowa women have met in many years. It's a reunion for me because I've been on this campus many years ago, and I've been traveling in many parts of Iowa, and I love your state, and I love the people. What did I do? Oh. It's a lavalier mic. I guess I'll just stay far away from it. I'm so dependent on these things, and yet they terrify you. You know, they always do you in. It's a delight also to be in this particular building, dedicated to continuing education and to lifelong learning. It seems to me that this is something that we have a great stake in as Christians, and a concern that there be no diminution of learning. I say that learning and growing ought to continue right up to rigor mortis. Nothing short of that. Like your theme, too, I believe that it speaks to our human condition today. I believe that we have enormous challenges, and I'd like to describe some that seem to me to be unusually demanding, particularly the Christian community. And then to talk on a more positive side on some of the great things that the churches can do. I'm one of the people who has never given up on the local congregation. I think it has enormous power and potential. I spent many years, many wonderful years with church women, and it is, for me, a very poignant homecoming to be with you again. Two very dear people helped to found the Grey Panthers in June of 1970. Ann Coleman Bennett, who was the wife of John Bennett of Union Seminary, and Helen Smith, who headed, I believe, and organized your department of the laity, or your division of the laity. And another UCC person who was also United Presbyterian was Eleanor French, who spent some time in the UC Church and some time in the United Presbyterian Church. So that we are indebted to you as a movement. We are indebted to the leaders who gave us the inspiration to do what we have done. It was Ann Bennett who stood up, and I can see her right this moment. How many of you know Ann? Well, you know, she's very straight-spoken. Some people think that she's too much so, but I personally enjoy everything that she says. She said, "We are expendable, but the young are not." And shortly after that time, she went to Hanoi with a group of other distinguished Americans to look at the whole tragic situation in North Vietnam. Later, she went to South Vietnam, and she saw the tiger cages that had been constructed with your tax money and mine, where the South Vietnamese regime, the military regime, had imprisoned political prisoners. Horrible, cruel, and unusual punishment was meted out with our support and tax dollars. Anne came back even more outraged than she was when she left. And her testimony and her concern gave us the ground for our movement. We came together first as old people. There were 6 of us who were forced to retire. We didn't want to retire, but we were all under the mandatory retirement rule. And at that time, we didn't protest it. But we said we have a very important question to ask ourselves and to answer. What are we going to do with the rest of our lives? What indeed are we to do? And what can we do that is most radical? Because our watchword very quickly became, we have nothing to lose. We've already been separated from our jobs, from a good income, from friends that we'd loved and worked with. Many things we had lost. So we had nothing to lose to speak out and to be very courageous and radical in our social criticism and in our action. So I thought you'd like to know where we're coming from and how indebted we are to your women for what they gave us and the start that they set us, the course that they set us on, we have tried to be faithful to. There are choices and there are challenges, as your theme suggests. It's an enormous challenge, I think, and I believe you would agree, to make personal choices, to choose, to leave behind something that you have done and that you feel very comfortable with. In a sense, it's a dying of that old order and a resurrecting, a rebirth of the new that is certainly a part of your choice. And for many people, they are not free to take the risk of choosing and of moving in a new direction. But I think in this age of liberation, there is abundant evidence that we must indeed choose. Now, the second challenge is that our society is sufficiently responsive and sufficiently flexible to provide options, so that there are indeed choices, that we're locked into old systems that are impervious to change, give us no choice. But when there are options for us to move into, there is freedom, and we can respond to the challenge of this new age. The personal challenge that we have, all of us, individually and collectively, and certainly we who stand within the Christian faith and are worshiping the Creator of all life, we have to bind ourselves to each other and a commitment to new goals, choices of new lifestyles, be those careers, be those education, be those a place to live, and the people that we're going to live with. It's a corresponding challenge to society. I think that society has been reluctant to take up, particularly the federal government, to exercise some real changes and innovations that are necessary in this new age. The basic shifts in population, the inappropriate technology that we've made such a fetish of, the worsening of the world economy, and the imbalances between the rich and the poor nations, the so-called developed world, which is so wasteful and so extravagant and so super consuming in its style of living, and the developing world, which has so little. And what it has, we speedily exploit. And then, of course, the thing that hangs over us all is the challenge and the threat of nuclear annihilation. Now, what do we do with all of this? First of all, I think we have to assess who we are and find in the gathering, and I take this gathering as a great company of people with common goals and common faith and common understanding of what the Creator of all life requires of all of us. But beyond that, I think the Christian community, which we are a part, has an obligation in the world. And I think your denomination has pioneered in so many ways in its ministry in a troubled world. It has reached out. It has taken the radical view and the courageous kind of action that has followed is commendable within the ecumenical movement. Before I describe some of the things that I see as challenges and options or choices, I'd like to tell you just a bit about myself. I'll have my 75th birthday in August. I travel about 100,000 miles a year and enjoy every mile. It's really exhilarating. Old age for me is the flowering of my life. And it's my prayer and my dream and my hope that it can be for all of you. It must be. I never married. In my day, I graduated from a women's college in 1926. And in those days, there were two choices. You could marry, or you could go to work. You could have a career. You did not do both. It was clear that you did not. And I chose to work. And I've never regretted it. All the time I was working, people would say, why, why not marriage? And I would try to deflect that question. It was an improper and an impertinent question, I thought. I didn't say so, I was more guarded in my comments then. But in my old age, you can speak out. But in my old age, when people ask me why I never married, I say, I guess I've been just very, very lucky. And this is not to say that I don't like men. In fact, I've had some great love affairs and some absolutely super lovers, and I brag about that too, and like to remember that. But in my old age, there is a freedom that I bring, and a freedom from angst that many women in my age group bring to old age. I've had to be strong. I've had to make my own way. I've outlived my mother and my father and my brother, all of whom I nursed and took care of until they died. I have second and third cousins left who are my only kinfolk. I like them. I rarely see them. We don't have too much in common when we do get together. But I have a family that I have chosen, and a family that has chosen me. There are 9 of us who live together in a big old house, which I own, with 3 cats, a poodle pup, a tank full of tropical fish, a pair of parakeets, and 150 plants, by last count, and a community garden. We have a seminarian who's finishing his last year at Princeton Seminary. We have a medical student who's beginning her first year at Temple Medical School. We have a radical nurse who wrote our nursing home action guide, Linda Horn, and got a master's at University of Iowa many years ago. We have 2 doctoral students, one in urban anthropology and one in social work. So we are an academic community in many ways. We're all busy, we all have our own agendas, but we have a common agenda, and that is to be friends with each other, to improve our neighborhood, and to live a lifestyle that shows that people who are not kin folk can indeed get along. We range in age from 22 to 74 and a half. And it is, I can say, a very, very happy way to live. The Boston Gray Panthers are operating now with the help of one of your UCC churches in the greater, in the Back Bay area. They have a big old townhouse on Marlborough Street that has 16 bedrooms and is inhabited on a cooperative basis. They all own shares by young, middle-aged, and old people. And they are planning very much to develop this as a model in Massachusetts. I'm going up next weekend to be with them, and we're going to strategize and see how they can move out with that. But we and they see the Church of Jesus Christ, as being the staging area for a new lifestyle, a supportive lifestyle that enables people who are joined together in their love of our Lord and in a common understanding of what the gospel requires of us to love and care for each other. It doesn't have to be a lifetime commitment. But we use for our definition of the family one that I'd like to share with you. I think it's useful, and I hope that it can be legislative, actually, in federal and state and local statute. We're paraphrasing a definition that the American Home Economics Association drafted and adopted in 1975 in one of their national conventions. This is the definition of a family. A family unit is two or more persons who share resources, goals, lifestyles, and commitment over time. A family is that network of responsibility and decision-making that goes beyond blood, legal ties, adoption, or marriage. Of course, you can say that the congregation itself is that kind of a family, right? With some kinfolk tossed in. But the possibility of the churches being the enablers of a new kind of family unit and a new lifestyle that would enable the many widows who are members of our congregations today. I met with one of our big churches in the Broad Street Presbyterian Church in Columbus several months ago, and the minister there told me that there are 50 widows in that congregation, and all of them live alone. Here they are in a university town. They could share that space with young people who can ill afford space. They would not be lonely. Their lives would be rich and invigorated if they would take the risk and choose and respond to a challenge that their loneliness and their isolation and their age have presented. I think it's something that really ought to be looked at in very, very probing terms. And I think of you with your great history and prophetic tradition as being one of the innovators where that might really move out. The only trouble is it's illegal in many places. But the zoning laws can be changed. Indeed, the Boston group got a variance, and they did, with the good offices of the church, get a loan from one of the banks of Boston, and they also got an insurance coverage, both of which were very difficult to negotiate because it was not a traditional family. So if we're going to respond to the challenge of a housing shortage, the challenge of loneliness and isolation in old age, particularly for women who are the survivors, we need to take some risks. And we need to provide some choices and options. Beside old age homes and retirement villages, which every one of the churches has built. Philadelphia Presbytery is building the 5th one in Greater Philadelphia. 5 old people's homes we've got. They're all too expensive for me to live in. I wouldn't like to live in those if I could. They're highly paternalistic. As one of the residents told me not long ago, she said, you know, we're really inmates here. She said, wise people make decisions for us. They know just what we need and want. And we get it whether we need it or want it. Which was a very succinct summary of the state of life, you know, in one of those places. And this is under the United Presbyterian Church, USA. It's a very prestigious institution. So we need options. And we need to have options that respond to the challenges. I believe today that feminism is one of the options for all of us. I've been a feminist as long as I can remember. My mother's oldest sister was a suffrage leader in Western New York. She was radicalized by the death of her husband in a terrible train wreck. He was an engineer in one of one of the fast passenger trains in the New York Central Railroad system. And he was killed when a switch was thrown and the train overturned and the engine, toppled on him. As his surviving widow, she never got even hospital expenses or funeral expenses to bury him. And he died, leaving her, a widow, and the mother of an 18-month-old child, a daughter. My aunt was grief-stricken and sad and lonely and mad and radicalized. And she joined the women's movement in Western New York, marched, made speeches, and was reviled for the things that she was doing and saying. And I've been eternally grateful for her leadership and her inspiration all through my life. I've worked for the YWCA, which gave me another kind of understanding of the importance of feminism. In my old age, I look back on my years with the United Presbyterian Church, and one of the things that I'm most proud of in the field of social action, where I worked for so many years, is the work that I was able to do with the Commission on the Status of Women and in the Women's Task Force that led to a new understanding of clergy persons and the role of women in the leadership of the church. It was hard and dangerous and controversial work, and I'm very proud and privileged to have been a part of it. I'm also concerned about, in my later years, and particularly in our Grey Panther movement, that as the women's movement matures, and as more and more of us in our late years enter it or continue in it, that we, with a historical perspective, can liberate the men. I really believe that. The men in our Grey Panther movement are liberated. They're all working for ERA, and they wear ERA buttons, and they've marched on many crusades, and you can count on their support and advocacy. And they're saying that their group needs liberation. They're locked into roles that are not appropriate or not human. And there can be no liberation for the women, no matter what our age or what our condition may be, unless the men in our lives are also free. So I think the best thing we can do for our husbands and our lovers and our brothers and our sons and our fathers is to be a part of the ERA and to be a part of the continuing liberation of people who have been oppressed. There are several things that I think make this a new age, and I'm going to briefly describe them and then launch into the particular challenges. There is a coming together in this decade, I see, a confluence of liberation movements. My last job with the United Presbyterians was in the Office of Church and Race. There were 2 women in that group. The other woman was a black woman. And she and I differed on one point, and that was the women's movement. She, as a black woman, felt that she could not join when black men were in subjugated roles, that women had to step back in order that their men step forward. And we argued about that. But recently I saw her, and she is one of us. And I rejoice that they're Indian women, they're Chicano women, they're Asian women, they're black women, and white women, finding a new and powerful sisterhood in this convergence of racial and sexual liberations. And I think that there is also a beginning of a convergence in terms of racial of freedom and sexual freedom and economic freedom, the freedom that we must have from economic imperialism, Western style, on college campuses today. I've been very much interested in the number of students. I hope this is happening here. Perhaps it is. A number of students are protesting to boards of trustees and to faculties and administrators the investment that the university has in South Africa or in other parts of the third world where people are oppressed. Why are the funds of great prestigious institutions used to oppress people, to continue the kind of degradation and poverty that characterize life in an oppressed developing world? So that they are seeing at long last the confluence of racial justice and economic justice. And I see very clearly, considering the demographic changes, that there is a new liberation struggle added to those others, and that is the struggle against ageism. And the struggle to free our society from gerontophobia. You know what gerontophobia is? It's a fancy sociological term that is briefly described as the irrational, unreasonable fear of old people and of growing old. And those two twin social maladies, ageism and gerontophobia, make old age a very dismal affair for the people who have reached their seniority, and make it a condition to be feared and denied and glossed over by the people who are not yet in that time of life. Now we say that age, I feel very deeply from a theological, philosophical point of view that age is the one thing every one of us shares with all of our fellow beings. We share it with all the other animals. We share it with the plants, with the whole created order. And when we take seriously the fact that we all are getting old, we are most in tune with the Creator's plan for all of us. Because everything that lives is born of seeds and develops, grows, bears fruit and progeny, and withers and dies. And in the dying, replenishes the earth. A marvelous miracle of the nitrogen cycle. And in that living and dying, the ending and the beginning, we are attuned with the whole rhythm of the universe. And when you get that into your thinking, how silly it is to dye your hair. It's most inappropriate. And how silly it is to lie about how old you are. It ultimately catches up with you, you know, if you're going to claim your Social Security benefits. Somebody has to know, and you might just as well be open and above board with it. Now, just for fun, let's have just a little change of pace. I would like to see just where we are in this group. I would love to find out, and I think you might find it interesting too, who is the oldest and who is the youngest. Would you like to do that? Wonderful. Between 85 and 90. 100. Now let's look back. How many are there between the ages of 65 and 70? Between the ages of 60 and 65? between the ages of 55 and 60. Between the ages of 50 and 55. Between the ages of 45 and 50. Between the ages of 40 and 45. That middle group is the most, seems, between the ages of 35 and 40. Between 30 and 35. Between 25 and 30. Between 20 and 25. Between 15 and 20. Between 5 and 10. How about that? Now, I think it would be interesting to discover who is the oldest, the people who raised their hands between 80 and 85. Are you the oldest? Do you mind telling us how old you are? 82. 82. Can anyone top that? Now, who is the, is there one over here who, you're all, how old are you? 82 and a half. Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Now, I think you ought to stand. Do you mind? And let the two winners up. The two of you stand. And let's find out who is the youngest person here. You, is there a 2-year-old in the house? Oh, there is. There he is. I didn't go back far enough. Hi. Alexander, is that your name? Well, it's delightful to meet you. That's marvelous. Well, you know, actually, now how many confessed your age bracket for the first time in public? Anybody? See, we're never going to be free from that fear, the gerontophobic tendencies that are in all of us, that society has induced us to have, unless we are comfortable with our bodies and recognize that we're a part of the whole created order when we are aging. Another thing that makes this a new age is the population shifts. The world population stood at approximately 2 billion in 1930, 4 billion in 1975, and projected to be 6 billion in the year 2000. Most of the growth, as you know, has been in the developing world, in the third world. And the growth there has been coupled with excessive poverty and excessive consumption in the developing world. And that population growth puts a tremendous strain on the Earth's resources and creates a great strain on the social fabric, too. Last year, the UN General Assembly voted to assemble in 1982 a World Assembly on Aging. This is to be observed somewhere in Europe and in the United States at the UN headquarters in New York. It was the third world that pressed for that, because the population growth and the extension of life and the longevity that accompanied it were factors that they had never had to cope with before, and they were not prepared to deal with it. In the United States today, we have approximately 24.9 million people over 65, more than 1 million more than the census takers estimated. Every day in America, 5,000 people have their 65th birthday. 3,400 die who have had their 65th birthday, leaving a net gain of 1,400. And if you have reached your 65th birthday, according to conservative demography, you will, if you're a woman, you have every opportunity to, an expectancy of living another 13 years. Your spouse, if you are still married, will probably live another 8 years. But women greatly outnumber men in their later years. We don't know why the males are so fragile, but they are. Is it stress? Is it hormonal protection that women have that give us a slight edge? We don't know. But these demographic changes are a tremendous challenge. How in a society that has made a fetish of the nuclear family, the couple, does an institution deal with large numbers of women who are not couples and who are going to live for 10 to 20 years more in a single blessed state? The churches are not prepared for that. And neither are many places in society. So I consider the demography an enormous challenge. The second challenge that I see is sheer survival. In a world made horribly dangerous by the presence of nuclear power plants and the presence of nuclear weapons and warheads. Red Panthers have been involved in all of the anti-nuke coalitions, and we've marched and we've demonstrated and we've yelled and we've carried banners, and we engage in anti-nuclear conversation whenever we have a chance. You see my button, shut them down. Would you like to join with me? No more nukes, no more nukes, no more nukes. It has a nice sound, no more nukes. And you in Iowa, I just challenge you to develop the alternate sources of energy. You've got wind, sometimes in tornado proportions. Your grandfathers had windmills. Why haven't you? There ought to be windmills whirling all over these big, beautiful buildings. There should be. I visited a large community college, Brookhaven College in Dallas, Texas, last year. And the president of that school, is a very large one, about 28,000 students, sent to West Germany for a huge windmill. It's a gorgeous thing. It looks like a Calder sculpture. It whirls, it's a glorious blue. Oh, it's romantic the way it whirls. It lights a huge parking lot. It makes the fountains play. It air cools a building that is as large as this. One windmill. And he's going to order another one from West Germany and sell the power to Texas Light. So alternative sources, alternative choices of energy are within our purview today. I would like to see every nutrition site that is set up under Title VII of the Older Americans Act, all the senior centers that are scattered around this state, every one of them ought to have three things. A community garden that people grow, a food cooperative. Who needs supermarkets? They just oppress the farmer. They really do. There could be direct relationship between the cooperators in the food co-op and the farmers who grow certain lovely things that are sold in the food co-op. It could be a marvelous exchange. Thank you so much. I'm going to take a drink of this because it's a lovely change from the Schuylkill punch that we have in Philadelphia. The water that we drink from the Schuylkill River is a rich elixir of chlorine and swill and coal dust. It's very heady stuff, and we get clean water like this, you can hardly bear it. And in the third place, every one of those nutrition sites and centers ought to be developing and using a solar greenhouse. I saw a beautiful solar greenhouse being built at Manhattan, Kansas, by the School of Agriculture and by the School of Proper, the state had put money into it. It was a big one, and they had teamed up with the psychology department and the School of Nursing on that campus, and they had developed an interdisciplinary master's program of horticultural therapy. And they were doing very extensive studies, longitudinal studies, showing that working with the plants, growing things, had a therapy. It was actually healing. And they're constructing their greenhouse, their solar greenhouse, with waist-high gardens so that people in wheelchairs can garden. Isn't that lovely? So that every solar greenhouse is a social comment. Every one of them is. And that use of the needs of old people is something that I think we ought to be looking at in hard, long terms. Nuclear power plants are just not safe. And 3 Mile Island was too close for comfort. I talked with a man at University Minnesota. Excuse me. I'll get over this in a minute if you'll just bear with me. It's horrible to listen to. I'm sorry. I talked with a professor at the Humphrey School of Political Affairs at University of Minnesota, who had been on the President's Commission to examine what really happened at 3 Mile Island. And what he told me was really terrifying. Nobody has been near the place because of the contamination and the large accumulation of close to 1 million gallons of contaminated water. And the water is gradually corroding the machinery and leaching into the subsoil, so that and ultimately into the river and into the whole environment. Horrible. A young friend of mine has a husband who works for Bechtel, and he has recently been dispatched by his company to San Francisco, the Livermore plant outside of San Francisco, to try to figure out how to take one of those things down. They put them up. But how do you dismantle them without doing lasting damage to the world? So I think you in Iowa, with your sun and your wind, you've got it made. Do you have nuclear power plants here? One. That ought to be shut. I'd like to come and help you, take it out of commission. Our economic system is sick, and it urgently needs healing. And we think one of the best ways to heal it would be to take money out of that bloated defense budget of Carter's and put it into mass transportation, Amtrak, and new alternate sources of energy. We've been working with the Progressive Alliance and Big Business Day, and we've discovered that if we were to take a minuscule amount from the defense budget, $14.2 billion, we would create, by those alternate kinds of employment, 770,000 new jobs within the calendar year when the money would be appropriated. It would be so simple to do that. And I think the religious communities of America, the churches and synagogues, have a tremendous challenge to defeat that budget, to transfer funds from it, and to get us back on a peaceful, harmonious track before we blow ourselves to bits. Now, what are the choices? There are 7 of them, and I'll briefly describe them. We have the choice, first of all, of making our human associations more significant. We are human beings set by our Creator to live with each other. We're not human alone. We maximize our potential. We become fully human when we are in touch with each other, in loving, supportive relationships with each other. Peter Berger, the sociologist, and another sociologist at Rutgers, Richard Newhouse, have defined 4 intermediary powers or forces that stand between the powerless person, you and me, confronted with bureaucracies, big business, big government, big labor, the multinationals that have so much oppressive power and money to throw around. We are powerless unless we stand together. And these sociologists remind us that there are 4 intermediary forces, and every living American has access to at least one of them. And some of us who are privileged have access to all 4. The first is the family. The natural family, the nuclear family, the extended family, or the family of choice that I described. We can live in family units and make those strong. The nuclear family is in trouble. We know that. Only about 16% of the people who are now married live in what is the traditional nuclear family style. The father, the breadwinner, the mother at home, and 2 children. Not at work. And the nuclear family has had to bear too heavy emotional load, and it breaks down. And we've made a fetish of it, and the upcoming White House Conference on the Family has been taken over by the pro-lifers. And the kind of family of choice, the extended family, the other alternative ways of living will not have a chance. And it's a shame. Because with all that publicity and the media event that it is bound to be, there could be some alternatives, some choices proposed. The second is the neighborhood. Neighborhoods are in bad shape too. Many of them are dying and dead, but not buried. In Philadelphia, we have 28,000 abandoned houses. 10,000 of them owned by HUD, repossessed mortgage payments that were defaulted. We don't know what to do with spreading blight. It's horrible for the old and the young who are trapped in those places. But neighborhoods can be reconstituted, reborn, healed. And I think of the churches and the worshiping communities as being the good neighbor in their parish. I'm not going to mention names. I'll just mention a church, which happens to be a Presbyterian church, near where I live in Germantown. I wanted to buy this house where I live, and because it's in a very mixed neighborhood, quote, a changing neighborhood, those people are coming in, and because I was a woman, I had very great difficulty getting a mortgage. And I asked the pastor of this large church, which has a very large endowment, whether the trustees would lend me mortgage money, which I would pay back. And he didn't sound too happy with my petition, but he promised to take it up with the trustees. I knew his heart wasn't exactly in it, And when I called him back a week later, he said he was very sorry, but they had told him that they were not in the real estate business. And then he went on to say, well, you know, Maggie, we have put a lot of our money into that retirement home that the Presbyterians building. But this was the third that they built. He said, we put several $1,000s into it. And I said, I suppose that's not real estate. But he saw, you see, their trustees were not educated to the fact that that neighborhood, that my buying that house and using it in a new way was an anchor in that neighborhood, in that troubled block. That was not valid investment of the church's money. The church's money would be invested in more wisely, they thought, in age-segregated housing, not in that deteriorated part of town. And from my point of view, it was an abdication of the neighborhood, the parish. And churches all over the country, I know UCC churches don't do that. You're much too wise and prophetic and to have ever gone into that trap, but I assure you that many others do, and you know it. But the church is the third intermediary force. And the church, too, has lost some of its clout in its own eyes, but not in the eyes of society. And I think when ministers, clergy, women and clergymen, and priests and rabbis go to the public arena and speak out on public issues, they are heard. Thus saith the Lord, is the impression that they convey. And the fourth intermediary force is the voluntary association. Now, one of the characteristics of American society is that we volunteer many good things. And volunteers give hours, years of dedicated work to good causes. We know how to do that. And this is one of our characteristics. I think there's been a slight erosion. I mean, I consider it a diversion in the women's movement that downplayed the volunteer role. I think that was that was an intermediary goal until women's work was properly awarded and rewarded. But those four intermediary forces could be very powerful, healing, reclaiming, renewing opportunities for all of us. In the second place, we can, as I spoke earlier, broaden our concept of the family. And I would love to see the churches represented here. Have some further discussion of that. It would be one of the ways in which the old and the young can be together again. People who need each other desperately have been kept apart by our age-segregated lifestyles and our age-segregated social policies and theories. And we can correct that in the Christian community. In the third place, we can change our lifestyles. Widows sharing what they've got. All kinds of cooperative ventured, rather than the fierce kind of competition that we've known so long. The new lifestyle that I think is appropriate for this new age is a lifestyle of cooperation and interdependence rather than independence. I've heard many of my peers say, I want to be independent just as long as I can be. And I say, well, that's not a very realizable goal because none of us are really independent. We need each other. And if we are so independent, we're pretty obnoxious to live with. We can protect our land. And this, to me, is an option, a choice, and a challenge. And it is survival for you in Iowa. I'm told by some people who attended the World Council Churches conference in Massachusetts, MIT, last summer, when they looked at world hunger and world food and world cropland, that we were diminishing our cropland by about 3 million acres a year. And I understand that you in Iowa, because of soil erosion and over-chemicalization of the land, you have moved from topsoil that the whole world envies, 2 feet deep, to fewer and fewer inches of topsoil. I'm told in some places only 6 inches. So that the land needs to be protected, and if we are ever to take seriously the Garden of Eden story, where we are to be the stewards of the garden, care for it, dress it, protect it, we have an obligation to ourselves and to those who come after us to protect the land. I hope that churches are a part of, and church women particularly, you who are, how many of you are farm wives? Oh, a number of you are. I salute you. I salute you. And I think your future depends on your being able to have that farm. And many women that I met on this campus a number of years ago who were farm wives were losing their farms because of the tax base and the escalating value of farm land. So I think there needs to be land trust operations set up, and churches could do that. Lands that are held in common and in trust. Land planning ought to be a top priority for the churches of this state. And the possibility of enhancing the productivity of the soil in this decade to come. Terribly important, lest you and I go hungry. We need to adopt new lifestyles that put us in touch with alternatives, many kinds of choices, and that free our minds from the restrictive kinds of habit that make it so difficult and so risky for us to choose to change. I would hope very much that in the foreseeable future that you as church women, with the men who mean much to you, would seek out the root causes of injustice in our sick society and would address those causes not with more services, which of course we need, but would really get at the basic reason for loneliness, for nursing homes, for poor health care, for unemployment, for eroded land, for nuclear dangers. The church has an obligation and an opportunity and an enormous choice to choose life that is abundant. I believe that old age should indeed be the flowering of life. It's a celebration of longevity. It ought to be a time of fulfillment, and it ought to be a time for risk-taking. And my hope and prayer is that the older people of this company, this great company, would step forward and be the risk-takers. You have nothing to lose. And it's an absolutely glorious way to go. A lifestyle of outrage is invigorating, positively. Great. And I commend it to you all. I'm wondering what the time frame is. I'd welcome an opportunity to respond to questions or comments. look forward to that. Yes. A family is two or more persons who share resources, values, lifestyles, and goals over time. It's the commitment, it's the network of commitment and decision-making that goes beyond blood, legal ties, adoption, and marriage. And a paraphrase of that was adopted by the American Home Economics Association in 1975. Yes. Well, at the present time,